The panel just said something on camera that they spent months avoiding. Not a leak from some anonymous source desperate to stir controversy. Not a blogger with a narrative to push. Not even a hometown fan base convincing themselves about their guy. This came from the very same voices who built their entire spring argument around protecting Deshaun Watson's return like it was some kind of NFL resurrection story. The same analysts who looked directly at Shedeur Sanders and refused to put him in the top 20 quarterbacks coming out of the draft. The same people who found creative ways to pump the brakes every single time his name appeared in serious conversation. And now, those exact same people are sitting in front of cameras saying something completely different. They're confirming what people in Cleveland have quietly believed for months. Shedeur Sanders is where greatness lives. The roster was built for him to win. And Watson, with $185 million paid and 3 serviceable games to show for it, is walking into an off-season camp with no pads trying to steal a starting job from a guy who made that entire offense believe in itself when there was absolutely nothing around him to believe in. When the people who fought hardest against your eyes finally start confirming what you always knew, that isn't just a moment. That is a turning point, and everything about this situation just shifted in ways that matter. For months, one analyst kept deflecting a simple question that hung over this entire competition like a cloud nobody wanted to address directly. Can Shedeur Sanders realistically be a top 20 quarterback in the NFL by 2026? It's a straightforward question that deserves a straightforward answer, but that's not what happened. Every time the topic came up, the response was always the same version of delay. I'll answer that after the draft. A stall, a hedge, a way of keeping the door closed without slamming it on camera in front of thousands of people. It was a strategic answer designed to buy time, designed to avoid commitment, designed to keep options open while the draft process played out and more information became available. But here's the thing about delaying answers in this industry. Eventually, the moment arrives when you can't delay anymore. The draft happened. The picks are in. The off-season is underway. And that analyst finally has nowhere left to hide. No more drafts to wait for. No more information that might change the narrative. No more reasons to punt the question down the road. The infrastructure is in place now. The roster is being built. The organizational commitment is visible. The coaching staff has made their moves. And when that analyst was asked the same question one more time, with all the pieces now on the board, the answer changed completely. With the additions to the offensive line, with Casey Conception bringing the vertical element that offense desperately needed, with Spencer Fano expanding what they can do schematically, with a coaching staff fully bought in and building the system around what Shedeur does well, the answer finally came. Yes, absolutely. Shedeur Sanders can be a top 20 quarterback in 2026. Let that land for a moment and really think about what that means. The analyst who wouldn't commit before the draft committed after it. The person who hedged and stalled and found reasons to wait finally went on camera and said it definitively. And his reasoning wasn't that Shedeur suddenly became a different player overnight. It wasn't that some magical transformation occurred between the draft and this moment. It was that the environment was finally being built to let him show what he already is. That distinction matters more than people realize, and it's worth dwelling on because it changes how we understand this entire situation. Think about what that analyst was really saying. He wasn't saying that Shedeur's ceiling got higher. He wasn't saying that the quarterback developed some new skill or overcame some fundamental limitation. He was saying that the obstacles keeping him from showing his true level were being removed. He was saying that last season, with that offensive line, with that receiver room, with those circumstances, we weren't seeing the real Shedeur Sanders. We were seeing Shedeur Sanders trying to survive in conditions that didn't match his abilities. The Browns didn't make soft investments this offseason to fix that problem. They didn't patch a few holes and hope for the best. They didn't add a receiver here and tinker with the line there and call it a day. They spent roughly $100 million specifically on protecting a young quarterback who spent last season operating behind one of the worst offensive lines in the entire NFL. That's not a casual investment. That's not a complimentary move. That's a massive, organizational commitment that signals exactly what the front office believes about their quarterback's future. Think about what that number actually means in real terms. Titus Howard, Zion Johnson, 2 significant additions to a unit that was getting Shedeur killed. not figuratively. Literally. He was taking hits he shouldn't have been taking. He was making decisions under pressure that no quarterback, regardless of talent or preparation, can consistently make clean when the pocket collapses before the play even has a chance to develop. A defensive end is in his face before his receivers have finished their routes. He has 2 seconds to make decisions that should take 5. He's stepping up into contact because there's nowhere else to go. That's not quarterback development. That's quarterback survival. And then the Browns hired George Warhop as the offensive line coach. Warhop isn't just any hire. This isn't a lateral move or a fill-in addition. Warhop has a documented track record of developing and maximizing linemen at an elite level. He takes raw pieces and turns them into functional, cohesive units. He does it at a high level. He does it consistently. So when the argument was made that Shedeur's struggles last season were more a personnel problem than a quarterback problem, this off-season spending is the receipts. This is the proof. You don't drop $100 million on an offensive line because you think your quarterback is the issue. You do it because you know your quarterback is the answer, and you finally want to give him the conditions to prove it. That's the message the front office is sending with every dollar spent and every personnel decision made. But here's where things get interesting, because that analyst didn't just flip completely and endorse Shedeur with no reservations. He attached a condition to his endorsement, and that condition says more about where Shedeur's game already is than it does about his ceiling or his limitations. When you really break it down and sit with it for a moment, this condition reveals something important about the level he's already operating at and what the coaching staff actually believes about his potential. The note was simple on the surface, but complex in what it implies. Shedeur has to take the layups. In quarterback terms, that means when the easy completion is there, the 5-yard out on 3rd and 4, the simple check down that moves the chains and keeps the drive alive, he has to take it. He can't always be looking for the spectacular play when the smart play is the boring one. He can't keep hunting for the home run when the first down is sitting there wide open. He has to show Todd Monken and the coaching staff that he trusts the system, even in the moments when the system is asking him to be disciplined instead of explosive. Even when his instincts are telling him to extend the play and make something special happen, he has to take the easy completion and move the offense forward. Now, some people hear that and immediately treat it as a knock. They hear Shedeur has to take layups and interpret it as Shedeur has accuracy issues or Shedeur makes bad decisions. They treat it as a fundamental criticism of his game, but sit with it for a moment and it reads differently. It reads like something else entirely. The reason great quarterbacks skip the layup is usually because they believe they can do something better. They have the arm talent. They have the mobility. They have the vision and the confidence to think they can hit the home run when a more conservative play is available. That impulse, that belief, is actually a trait of elite competitors. It's what separates good quarterbacks from great ones. The problem is only in execution. Knowing when to let the spectacular go and be great in the ordinary moment is a developmental step. It's the developmental step. It's the one thing standing between where Shedeur is right now and the next level. And the fact that it's the main note being raised means everything else about Shedeur's game is already at the level where the coaching staff is comfortable. If the concern was his arm talent, they'd mention arm strength. If the concern was his decision-making under pressure, they'd talk about that. If the concern was his footwork or his mechanics or his ability to go through progressions, those would be the notes. But those aren't the notes. The note is about discipline, about understanding when to be a specialist player making the difficult throw and when to be a system quarterback executing what the system asks him to execute. That's not a fundamental limitation. That's a refinement. That's the kind of thing that separates a good year from a great year. Here's the bigger point that ties everything together. Last season, Shedeur was being asked to take layups to targets who weren't getting open. The easy throw didn't exist at a consistent rate because the receivers weren't consistently creating separation. He was looking for the spectacular play, not because he was undisciplined, but because the discipline wasn't available. When your first option isn't open, and your second option isn't open, and your protection is breaking down, you have to extend the play and create something. That wasn't poor decision-making. That was survival. That was a quarterback doing what he had to do to keep the offense functioning in an environment that wasn't built to function. This year, the context is fundamentally different in ways that matter. Denzel Boston is a real red zone presence. He can win contested balls and create plays in the most important area of the field. Casey Conception can threaten defenses vertically in ways that nobody in that receiving room could last season. Jerry Jeudy enters a contract year with everything to prove, so he's going to be fighting for catches with urgency and intensity. The layups are going to be there this time. The easy completions will exist at a consistent rate. The first read will be open more often. Whether Shedeur takes them when they're available, that's what the tape will answer. But the infrastructure exists now. The weapons exist now. The opportunity exists now. And that's the part that changes everything about how we should evaluate him going forward. The evaluation that was never really fair last season can finally happen under conditions that actually tell you something real. Can Shedeur Sanders be great for 4 quarters? That's the right question to ask. With last year's personnel around him, that question couldn't be answered cleanly because you couldn't separate what was Shedeur and what was the chaos surrounding him. The two were too tangled together. A bad line, a limited receiver room, a first-year head coach getting his footing in his system, too many variables to isolate the quarterback. This year, those variables are different, and that changes what the tape is going to tell us. The Browns didn't make soft investments this offseason. That's the starting point for understanding what's actually happening in Cleveland right now. This wasn't the kind of offseason where a team patches a few holes and hopes for the best. This wasn't a year where they added complementary pieces and crossed their fingers. This was an offseason where the organization made a statement with their wallet, with their draft picks, and with every personnel decision they made. They spent roughly $100 million specifically on protecting a young quarterback who spent last season operating behind one of the worst offensive lines in the entire NFL. Let that sink in. $100 million. That's not a casual investment in a position group. That's a massive organizational commitment that signals exactly what management believes about their quarterback's future. Think about what that number actually means in real terms, because numbers without context are just numbers. Titus Howard, Zion Johnson, 2 significant additions to a unit that was getting Shedeur killed last season. Not figuratively. Literally, he was taking hits he shouldn't have been taking on play after play. He was making decisions under pressure that no quarterback, regardless of talent level or preparation, can consistently make clean when the pocket collapses before the play has a chance to develop. A defensive end is collapsing in his face while receivers are still running routes. He has 2 seconds to make decisions that should take 5. He's stepping up into contact because there's nowhere else to go. He's improvising on plays that weren't designed to be improvised on. That's not quarterback development. That's quarterback survival. That's a young player trying to function in conditions that don't match his skill set. Every hit he took last season was a reminder that the infrastructure around him wasn't right. Every poor decision made under pressure was a consequence of circumstances, not capability. Every incompletion had context that extended beyond his arm talent or decision-making ability. The offensive line situation was creating a cascading effect where everything else in his game became harder. It's harder to be accurate when you're moving laterally to escape pressure. It's harder to go through your progressions when you're worried about keeping your body intact. It's harder to execute the coaching staff system when you're in constant survival mode. And then the Browns went and hired George Warhop as the offensive line coach. This wasn't a lateral move or a fill-in hire to keep the position stable. Warhop has a documented track record of developing and maximizing linemen at the highest level of football. He takes raw pieces and turns them into functional, cohesive units that perform at a high standard. He has done it before in this league. He has the experience. He has the proven ability. He knows how to develop young linemen and make them understand what's required at this level. So when an analyst made the argument, and it's genuinely hard to push back on this argument now, that Shedeur's struggles last season were more a personnel problem than a quarterback problem, this off-season spending is the receipts. This is the proof on the table. This is the front office saying, we know what the problem was, and we're fixing it. You don't drop $100 million on an offensive line because you think your quarterback is the issue. That doesn't happen in the modern NFL. Teams don't invest massive resources trying to protect a player they don't believe in. You don't commit that kind of capital to improving a unit specifically designed to help a quarterback if you have doubts about that quarterback's future. You do it because you know your quarterback is the answer, and you finally want to give him the conditions to prove it. That's the organizational conviction that drives $100 million in spending. That's what the math tells us about what the front office believes about Shedeur Sanders. But understanding the investment is only part of the equation. Understanding what the investment means in terms of expectations and evaluation is the other part. When a team spends that kind of money, they're not doing it to create a fair competition between two quarterbacks. They're not doing it to give Watson a fighting chance. They're doing it because they've already made a decision about their quarterback's future, and they're now building around that decision. The spending patterns tell us where management's conviction lies. The personnel moves tell us who the organization is building for. The coaching hires tell us who the system is being designed around. George Warhop wasn't hired to develop Deshaun Watson. The offensive line additions weren't made to protect Watson. The offensive coordinator isn't building his system around Watson's strengths or limitations. Every single resource decision made this offseason is flowing downstream from one organizational belief, and that belief centers on Shedeur Sanders as the franchise quarterback. When you see $100 million committed to offensive line improvement, when you see a specialized coach hired specifically to develop young linemen, when you see the entire organizational approach shift in a direction, that's not coincidence. That's not a competition with an open outcome. That's a front office that's already decided who their guy is and is now building the infrastructure to let him succeed. Now let's get into the Watson side of this, because the panel's handling of the Watson argument this week was genuinely eye-opening in ways that matter. The way they framed it, the specific numbers they put on it, the language they used, it's probably the most damning thing anyone has said publicly about this situation all off-season. Not because they were being harsh for the sake of being harsh, but because they were finally being honest about what the actual record shows. 3 good games. $185 million paid. That is the Cleveland Browns' return on the most expensive quarterback investment in NFL history at the time the deal was signed. Not 19 serviceable games where the team was competitive, but lost close ones. Not a winning record where you can point to other factors dragging the team down. Not even a single moment where the franchise looked at Deshaun Watson under center and genuinely felt like it had found its guy. 3 good games for $185 million. That's the ratio. That's the math. That's what the investment produced in terms of actual results on the field. And now Watson is walking into an off-season camp with no pads, with no contact, with nothing on the line, going up against what some analysts consider a top 5 defense in live action settings. He's trying to prove enough to take a starting job from a player who, on a 5-win team, with the worst weapons in football, brought confidence and swagger to that huddle in a way that made that entire offense believe they could compete. Let that land. A 5-win team. A receiver room that was struggling to function. A line that was one of the worst in the league. And somehow, Shedeur made that group believe. He brought something to the table that you can't quantify in statistics. He brought leadership. That last part was what one analyst emphasized, and it's worth dwelling on because it reframes the entire Watson argument in a way that changes the conversation. There were genuine moments last season when that Cleveland offense actually believed it could win games with Shedeur under center. Not down the road. Not once they got better players around him. Not eventually. In real time. In games that were already supposed to be losses. In situations where the math said they shouldn't be competitive. But they were competitive because Shedeur brought something to that huddle that made guys believe. That's leadership. That's the intangible that no contract can manufacture. That's the element that no sum of money can buy. And that is exactly what Watson is now being asked to go produce against a first-team defense in an environment with no live bullets and no real stakes. The bar isn't fair, but it wasn't Watson who set it. It was 6 years of declining performance that came before this moment. It was the contract that didn't produce results. It was the injuries and the complications and the wear on the body. The panel didn't sugarcoat this part. One voice said it bluntly without hedging or trying to soften the blow. For 6 years, Watson has been bad. The track record says what it says. You can construct arguments about fit. Maybe the Stefanski offense wasn't built for Watson's strengths. Maybe the Munkin system unlocked something that wasn't missing so much as misplaced. Maybe there's a coaching change or a personnel addition that changes everything. Those arguments are theoretical. they're possible, but possibility is not probability. When one side of this competition has already shown that it can bring swagger to a huddle, make an offense believe in itself, and put up an 80% completion rate in mini-camp conditions, and the other side is coming off a 6-year track record of declining production, 2 Achilles ruptures, and a body that has not held up consistently under the demands of NFL football, the burden of proof in this competition is not evenly distributed. The cameras will roll. That was how the panel put it, and it's exactly right. The cameras will roll and the team will play, and the tape will be generated, and everyone will see what happens. The camera doesn't account for contracts. It doesn't care about what ownership preferences are or what a signing meant to a franchise at the time it happened. The camera captures what happens on the field, and the team gravitates toward the player that evidence keeps pointing to. That process has already started. It began in the voluntary workouts. It continued through minicamp where Shedeur was operating at a high level. It's building momentum into OTAs with every rep Shedeur shoulders with the first-team offense while Watson is working with backups. Watson can show up desperate. He can eat, sleep, and breathe football every single day between now and training camp. He can give everything he has in the off-season environment. That kind of desperation can generate real effort and real commitment. No one is dismissing that, but effort in an off-season setting with no pads and no contact does not erase 6 years of declining production. It doesn't erase 2 major injury setbacks that both occurred to the same body part. It doesn't erase the historical investment that never delivered the football results it was supposed to justify. That record exists. The camera captured all of it. Let's talk about what this off-season construction actually says at the organizational level, because it's the part of this story that gets glossed over in the noise of the competition narrative. Everyone wants to talk about the quarterback competition. Everyone wants to debate who's winning the daily drills. Everyone wants to speculate about what the coaching staff is thinking. But the real story is written in the roster construction, in the resource allocation, in the specific personnel decisions that reveal what the organization actually believes about its quarterback situation. The Browns spent $100 million on the offensive line. They added Casey Conception for a vertical threat, a weapon they didn't have in their receiving room before. They brought in Denzel Boston as a genuine red zone presence, someone who can win contested balls in the most important area of the field. Spencer Fano adds schematic versatility to the receiver room, allowing the offense to do things it couldn't do before. They surrendered 2 first-round picks. One for the tackle who will protect the quarterback on every single drop back, every single play. One for the receiver who extends the field and gives defenses problems they cannot solve with simple coverage. That's significant capital. Those are assets that most teams don't just give up. None of that is a list compiled for a quarterback competition. That's not what you do when you have 2 guys and you're genuinely undecided about which one is your future. You don't commit that kind of capital to a roster you're uncertain about. You don't give up first-round picks to address needs for a quarterback situation you're still evaluating. That is a roster that was built for a quarterback the organization has already decided is their guy. Everything about the construction process, every decision made, every dollar spent, every pick traded, it all points in the same direction. When you spend $100 million on an offensive line, you don't do it for a backup. You don't commit that kind of capital to protect someone you're not sure about. You do it because you're confident in the player you're protecting and you want to give him every advantage possible. When you select a receiver at 24th overall in the draft, specifically because his versatility at the root level and his fit in the system aligns with what your offense is installing, you are not doing that for a player you are unsure about. You are not giving up that kind of draft capital for someone you think might not pan out. You're doing it because you've already made the decision that this quarterback is your future, and you're now building every supporting element around him. Every single resource decision made this off-season flows downstream from one organizational conviction. Shedeur Sanders is the franchise quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, and this team is being constructed around what he is capable of becoming. That's the organizing principle behind every move. That's the through line that connects all the dots. George Warhop was brought in to develop that offensive line specifically for a young quarterback who needed a clean pocket and consistent protection. He wasn't hired to maximize Deshaun Watson's remaining years. He was hired to develop a unit that protects Shedeur Sanders for the next decade. The system was designed around Shedeur's movement ability and his decision-making in structure. The coaching staff isn't building an offense for a veteran quarterback trying to operate from the pocket. They're building a system that uses Shedeur's strengths, his mobility, his ability to extend plays, his vision downfield. The weapons were added to match with what the offense will ask him to do. A vertical threat like Casey Conception complements Shedeur's ability to push the ball downfield. A red zone presence like Denzel Boston gives him options when the field gets compressed. A versatile receiver like Spencer Fano gives the coordinator more schematic options to work with. Every piece fits a specific quarterback, and that quarterback is not Deshaun Watson. This is where the organizational signal becomes unmistakable. You can point to any individual decision and construct an argument that it might apply to either quarterback. You can say the offensive line upgrades help any quarterback. You can say the weapons are good regardless of who's throwing to them. You can rationalize each piece in isolation. But when you step back and look at the entire picture, when you see how everything connects and flows from one central point, the signal is clear. This organization has already decided. The roster is being built for one quarterback. The system is being designed for one quarterback. The coaching staff is aligned around one quarterback, and everything else is either secondary or irrelevant. Now that the infrastructure is in place, now that the weapons are finally assembled, now that the protection is finally there, now that the coaching staff is fully invested and publicly calling Shedeur an elite playmaker, the evaluation that was never really fair last season can finally happen under conditions that actually tell you something real. That's what matters. That's what changes the entire conversation. Last season was a learning year in a bad situation. This season is the real test because everything is finally in place for him to show what he's actually capable of doing when he has the right environment around him. Here's the part that separates this quarterback situation from every other competition happening around the league. It's not just about talent. It's not just about arm strength or accuracy or decision-making ability. It's about something less tangible, but equally important. It's about what a quarterback brings to the huddle when everything is falling apart around him. It's about leadership in conditions where leadership is hardest to manufacture. The panel raised something this week that doesn't show up on stat sheets and doesn't appear in game films unless you really know what you're looking for. They talked about what Shedeur brought to that offense last season when objectively, mathematically, the team had no business competing. A 5-win roster. A receiver room that was struggling to function at a consistent level, an offensive line that was one of the worst in the entire league. A situation where on paper, the offense shouldn't have believed in itself, but it did, because Shedeur brought something to that huddle that made guys believe. Not eventually, not down the road when everything got better, in real time, in actual games, in situations where the margin for error was non-existent. That's leadership. That's the intangible that no contract can manufacture. That's the element that no sum of money can buy. You cannot trade for it. You cannot draft it. You cannot hire a coach to teach it. Either a player has it or he doesn't. Either he brings that element to the environment around him or he doesn't. And either way, it shows up in how the team responds to him when the stakes are real. One analyst put it a specific way that's worth dwelling on. He said there were genuine moments when that Cleveland offense actually believed they could win, not believed they might eventually, not believed in some theoretical future state. Believed in that moment in that game with those circumstances that they could go out and actually win. That kind of belief is contagious. It spreads through a locker room. It affects how players prepare. It affects how they execute. It affects whether they give you their best effort in moments where they could have quit. Think about what that means in real terms. You have a receiver who knows the line is bad and he's going to get hit on some routes, so he could take plays off or run routes at 70% intensity. But instead, he runs them at full intensity because his quarterback believes. You have a running back who could get frustrated with the game plan when nothing seems to be working, but instead, he stays locked in because the quarterback's confidence is contagious. You have a defense playing ahead and thinking about next season, but instead they fight because they feel the offense believes in themselves. That's the difference between a 5-win team and a 3-win team. That's the difference between a team that competes in losing efforts and a team that completely quits. And Shedeur brought that element. On a team with the worst weapons in football, with an offensive line that was getting him killed, with circumstances that would have made most young quarterbacks frustrated or discouraged, he brought swagger. He brought belief. He made that offense trust him. And that is exactly what Watson is now being asked to go produce. But the circumstances are completely different. Watson is walking into an off-season camp with no pads, no contact, no real stakes, no live bullets. A controlled environment where nothing matters and everything is controlled. He's going up against a top 5 defense where he can be hit, but the defense can't go all out. It's practice. It feels like practice. It looks like practice. And the question becomes, can Watson produce leadership energy in a practice environment? That's not fair to Watson. That's a bar that's been set by Shedeur's performance in real games with real consequences. But that's the bar that exists. That's the standard against which both quarterbacks are being evaluated. One brought leadership and belief to a losing situation in real games. The other is being asked to prove leadership in a practice environment where nothing is real. The effort might be there. The desperation might be visible. Watson might show up hungry and ready to fight for the job. But effort and desperation in an off-season environment are different from leadership in a game environment. One is visible in practice. The other is visible when the lights are on and guys are lined up trying to hit you. One can be manufactured through commitment. The other either exists or it doesn't. That distinction matters because it explains why so many analysts are confident in the direction this competition is heading. It's not just the talent differential. It's not just the circumstantial factors or the recent history. It's that Shedeur has already proven he brings something to the table that matters in real football. And Watson is being asked to prove he still has it in an environment where nothing is being tested except how hard he's willing to work. Here's the part of the panel conversation that deserves the most attention because it addresses the question that no one in Cleveland really wanted to confront directly until this week. What if Watson somehow wins the competition? What if he shows up desperate and hungry and manages to convince the coaching staff that he's the guy? What if, against all the odds and all the historical precedent, Watson comes out on top when the depth chart is finalized? That's the question that hangs over this entire situation, and the panel's response to that question was blunt in a way that left very little room for interpretation. You would have to be desperate to play Deshaun Watson at this point. That was the answer. Not Watson could be a solid backup. Not Watson could provide trade value. Not Watson could mentor the younger players. Desperate, you would have to be desperate. And if the coaching staff names Watson the starter heading into the season, what that tells you is not about Watson. It tells you exactly where the coaching staff believes Shedeur's development currently stands. It tells you they think he's not ready. It tells you they believe he needs another year. It tells you something went wrong in the evaluation process. But then someone on the panel said something that reframes the entire Watson financial argument in a way that cuts through everything else. And it's worth stopping on because it matters for how we understand this entire situation. If Watson is named the starter, it won't be because the money influenced the decision. The $185 million is gone. It's already spent. It doesn't come back regardless of who takes the first snap in week 1. You can't recover a sunk cost. You can only move forward from it. Sunk cost is sunk cost, and any organization that makes football decisions based on recovering sunk costs rather than honest present tense evaluation of which quarterback gives them the best chance to win has already decided to lose before the season starts. That's not harsh. That's accurate. Teams that care more about justifying past decisions than making good current decisions end up in the cycle of mediocrity for years. They become the franchise that keeps making decisions to defend previous decisions instead of making the decisions that actually improve their team. The question the Browns front office has to answer is the only question that ever actually mattered in any quarterback competition. Which quarterback gives Cleveland the best chance to win now and in the future? Strip away the contract. Strip away the reputation that Watson brought when he signed. Strip away the organizational politics. Strip away what the signing meant to a franchise that was desperate for a solution in 2022. Strip away all the context and all the history and all the external factors. Just ask the clean question. Which quarterback gives us the best chance to win? And follow where the evidence goes. That evidence has been pointing in the same direction for months, and this week the panel finally stopped pretending it wasn't. They stopped hedging. They stopped looking for reasons to maintain optimism about Watson. They stopped trying to balance both sides and present this as some kind of genuine competition where both outcomes are possible. They looked at the evidence and they called it. The evidence points to Shedeur. The evidence points to the younger quarterback with the work ethic and the character and the ability to bring confidence to a locker room. The evidence points away from the veteran quarterback with the declining production and the injury history and the body that hasn't held up under the demands of NFL football. But here's where it gets important. Understanding that the evidence points one direction doesn't mean the outcome is guaranteed. It means the probability is clear. It means the direction of travel is obvious. It means that if you had to bet money on which quarterback the team gravitates toward when the actual games start being played, you'd bet on Shedeur. But off-season competitions don't always follow the logical path. Coaching staffs sometimes make decisions based on factors beyond pure performance. Front offices sometimes make moves designed to protect previous moves. Organizations sometimes double down on investments even when the evidence suggests they should move on. The panel is confident, but they're not saying it's mathematically impossible for Watson to win this competition. They're saying it would require desperation. It would require the coaching staff to believe that Shedeur is somehow not ready, despite everything they've done to build a roster around him. It would require them to ignore the organizational signals they've sent with $100 million in spending. It would require them to go against the direction of all available evidence. That's the difference between what the evidence suggests and what the outcome will be. The evidence suggests Shedeur is the guy, but the outcome won't be decided in an off-season camp with no pads and no contact and no real stakes. The outcome will be decided when games are played, when the cameras roll, when things matter. And that's where the real evaluation happens. That's where you find out which quarterback actually brings what he showed in an off-season environment into game situations where it counts. Here is where everything stands right now, assembled one final time, so we can see the complete picture of what this situation actually represents. Every element connected, every piece of evidence considered, every statement from the panel and every organizational decision evaluated. When you put it all together, when you see how it connects, the story that emerges is one of a franchise that's already made its decision and is now building around that decision. Deshaun Watson is eating, sleeping, and breathing football because he understands on some level that this is the last real shot. Maybe not his last year in the NFL, but his last chance to be a starter for a team that's invested in him and believes in his future. He knows that if he doesn't win this competition, if he doesn't start games and play well when those games matter, his career trajectory changes. He becomes a backup. He becomes a career backup. His NFL future becomes defined by managing a clipboard and waiting for injuries. That kind of pressure can generate real commitment. It can produce a player who gives everything available in an off-season setting. He can show up in better condition than he's been in years. He can move better. He can throw better. He can look like the version of himself that was worth $185 million. Nobody is questioning the effort Watson will bring into camp. Nobody is dismissing the possibility that he shows out in practice. Nobody is saying he can't have a good off-season. But here's the thing about off-seasons. They don't count. Effort in a no-pads environment does not erase 6 years of declining production. It doesn't erase 2 catastrophic injuries to the same body part, both of which came at critical moments in his career. It doesn't erase the $185 million investment that produced 3 good games as its headline achievement. That track record exists. It happened. The camera captured all of it, and no amount of off-season work erases what's already on tape. Shedeur Sanders, meanwhile, has been in the building all winter. He's been working with the coaching staff. He's been learning the system. He's been building chemistry with his receivers. His mini-camp completion percentage was at 80%, not 60%, not 70%, 80%. He gave an offense that had every reason to give up on itself the belief that it could compete. Not someday, not eventually, but in real games with the worst weapons in football around him. He demonstrated that he could lead in the most difficult circumstances. And now, he has a $100 million offensive line behind him protecting him on every snap. He has new weapons working alongside him, all selected to complement his strengths. He has a head coach who has staked his credibility on him publicly, repeatedly, making clear statements about his belief in Shedeur as a quarterback. And he has a panel of analysts, the very same analysts who wouldn't rank him in the top 20 coming out of the draft, telling the world that greatness is inside this quarterback. The very same voices who pumped the brakes on the Shedeur story every chance they got. The very same people who found reasons to wait and hedge and delay their commitment. Those people are now saying it. Publicly, on camera, Shedeur Sanders can be a top 20 quarterback in the NFL by 2026. That reversal means something. It means the evidence finally became too clear to ignore. It means the organizational investment and the off-season construction made the case so obvious that neutrality wasn't an option anymore. The roster was built for him to prove it. That's the organizational statement. That's what the spending says. That's what the draft picks being traded say. That's what every personnel decision made from March through May says. This roster was built for Shedeur Sanders to take a leap. This roster was built for him to show what he's actually capable of doing when the environment matches his ability. This roster was not built for a quarterback competition. It was built for a quarterback who the organization has already decided is their future. The tape is going to play. That's the next chapter. Off-seasons are over. The equipment managers are packing up the voluntary workout gear and getting ready for training camp where things matter. The cameras will roll on moments that count. The team will follow the quarterback who is clearly superior, regardless of what any contract says or what any reputation demands. The team doesn't make decisions based on sunk costs. The team makes decisions based on which quarterback gives them the best chance to win. And when they see that on tape, when the evidence is clear, the team gravitates toward that player. And the quarterback who already proved he could run that huddle with nothing around him is about to find out what he can do with everything around him. That's the question that matters. That's the evaluation that's about to happen. Not in an off-season camp with no pads and no contact, but in real games where things are on the line, where leadership is tested, where evidence is generated that actually tells you something real. Cleveland has been waiting for this moment. They've been waiting for the environment to match the quarterback. They've been waiting for the investment to be built. They've been waiting for everything to align. And from every angle available, the organizational investment, the coaching commitment, the panel's own reversed position, everything says the wait is about to be worth it. The Watson argument isn't just fading, it's closing. The only thing left now is the tape, and the tape does not lie. Drop your thoughts below. Is the Watson chapter in Cleveland officially closed? How far does this Browns offense go once Shedeur finally gets the environment that actually matches what he's shown he's capable of doing? These questions are going to define the next chapter of Browns football, and the answers are coming sooner than anyone expected. The evidence has been building. The panel has spoken. The organizational investment has sent the message. Every signal points in one direction, but signals and evidence and organizational moves are just preparation for what actually matters. What matters is the tape. What matters is when games are played and quarterbacks are evaluated under real circumstances with real consequences. That's when you find out which investments were right. That's when you see which quarterback actually belongs. The Browns have spent the capital. They've made the moves. They've aligned the organization. Now it's time to see if it was all worth it. Subscribe and hit the bell. Every development in this story breaks here first, and the story is just getting started.